When I was a teenager, we went on holiday to Cornwall. We stayed in one of those caravan parks, and there's lots of activities and clubs and groups that you go be part of. And I spent a lot of my time just at those groups and got to know some people from Liverpool really well, and would spend like every waking minute of every day with them, just hanging out with them, having lots of fun. And the thing is, they had this really strong Scouse accent, and because I spent so much time with them, I started to sort of pick up their accent, not deliberately, sort of like by osmosis, and I started to talk with this Scouse accent. And the problem is, I'm really bad at accents, so it sort of sounded like I was taking the mick out of them, and that wasn't the intention at all. And I went on holiday to Cornwall, and I came back with a Scouse accent. That's just the kind of guy that I am. And I wonder, has anything like that ever happened to you? Now, I'm sure that hasn't happened to you, but have you ever started to become like someone else? Have you ever started to sound like somebody else, or started to look like somebody else, or started to behave like somebody else because you spent so much time with them that actually you start to look like them, that you start to sound like them, that you start to become like them? We're starting this brand new series called Following Jesus, and it's following Jesus is a bit like going on holiday to Cornwall and coming back with a Scouse accent. I know that sounds really confusing, and hopefully you understand what I mean by the time we get to the end of this. A lot of the stuff we're looking at in this series is based on this book, Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it to you. It's encouraging, and it's inspiring, and it's helpful. We've actually got some copies in the hub. If you want to buy a copy afterwards, you can grab one from there, or you can get it from wherever you get your books from. And so we're going to dive into some of this sort of stuff and explore that over the next few weeks, and as we discover, what does it mean to actually follow Jesus? What does it mean to practice this thing called the way, and spend time with Jesus? Because following Jesus is a bit like going on a holiday to Cornwall and coming back with a Scouse accent. See, there's a religious word that we use to describe somebody who is a follower of Jesus, and that's simply a disciple. And maybe you've heard of the 12 disciples that followed Jesus around, but there were more than just those 12. And after the death and the resurrection of Jesus, after this thing which they called the way spread across the world, more and more people started following Jesus. More and more people were enamored by who Jesus was and the things that Jesus did, and they wanted to spend time with him, and they wanted to become like him. They wanted to follow him. So like this movement spread and spread and spread, and more people became disciples of Jesus. And you know what? We could probably split, we're not going to do this, but we could split the room into two groups. There's people who say, yeah, I'm a follower of Jesus, and people say, well, no, I'm not a follower of Jesus. I'm not a disciple. And maybe it's a bit more, it's not so black and white. Maybe it's more like a continuum. We could draw a line along this hall, and one side is the most avid Jesus follower, and the other side is the person who's most anti-Jesus. Don't read too much into it, that's the Man United symbol there. I don't know how that happened at all. But where would you put yourself on that line? If I was to say to you now, well, let's get up and let's move. If you are the most avid Jesus follower, go to that wall. If you're the most anti-Jesus person, go to that wall, or whereabouts where do you fit on that spectrum of faith? And maybe if you're someone who's curious about faith, maybe if you're someone who's skeptical about faith, maybe you're someone who's down this side of the line, you might be asking yourself this question: am I a disciple? It's a good question to ask, and this is what we're going to explore as we go throughout this series. Now, am I a disciple? Is a thing maybe some of us have to ponder and ask ourselves at one point or another. Do I want to be a disciple? Is a question that we could ask. But actually, I'd like to suggest that at the moment, this isn't the important question. This isn't the right question, that we should ask. Rather, the question we should be asking is, who or what am I a disciple of? See, the reality is that we are all following somebody or something. We all follow somebody. We all follow something. And you might want to push back against that. You might want to resist that. You might want to rebel against that and say, well, no, that might be true for you, Chris, but that's not true for me. I am my own person. I forge my own path. I do what it is that I want to do. I don't follow anybody. I'm not a disciple of anybody it's up to me. And you might think that's the case, but the reality is, in situations or circumstances, in some points of our lives, we are a disciple of something or someone. We follow something or someone. And you might like to think that, I can be true to my authentic inner self. I do me and you do you, and that's all true. And yeah, okay, that might be true in some aspects of life. But actually, we are all following something somewhere. We are all following someone somewhere. And, advertising is a great example of this. You just take a quick look at the world and we see that we're bombarded by so many cultural forces that are trying to convince us or shape us or mold us or manipulate us. And advertising is exactly about that. Advertising is trying to convince you to buy that, to go there, to use this. And what's more, it's trying to convince you that your need for whatever it is that it's trying to sell you was your idea in the first place. And, we're sort of discipled in more subtle ways as well. Every single interaction that we have, the people that we spend time with actually shape and mold us. The people that we work with, or the people that are in our families, the people that we might travel with, whoever you spend time with shapes you and molds you. You are different because of that interaction. All the hobbies, your interests, the things that you spend your time doing, those things shape and mold you. You are different because of the time that you've invested in those things. So we are all a disciple of something. We are all a disciple of someone. And we might like to think, well, no, I'm independent, that I'm in control. We might like to think, well, I'm a leader, I'm in charge, I'm in control of all of my life. And yeah, that might be true for some aspects of our lives. But the reality is, all of us are followers. We all follow something. We all follow someone. And what we follow shapes us. And in some way, what we follow actually influences us to become like it. So if that's true, if we're all following someone, if we're all following something, the important question we need to ask ourselves is, what I'm following helping me become who I want to be? Is the thing that you're following, is the person that you're following, is the thing that you're a disciple of, and perhaps you never thought of it like that way, is it actually helping you to become the person that you want to be, or is it pulling you away from that ideal? You're a disciple of something. So is that thing that you're a disciple of, is that person that you're a disciple of, helping you be the best version of yourself? Or is it pulling you away? Is it making you be less than you can be? You see, I'm a follower of Jesus. I've dedicated my life to following Jesus. I've dedicated my life to trying to live my life as Jesus would if he was in my situation, if he was in my shoes, if he was in my circumstances. And the reality is I get that wrong so many times. But that's the sort of orientation that I have, that I want to follow him and I want him to influence me. I want him to shape me. I want him to mold me. And what I've discovered and what I believe, that as I try and follow Jesus, that actually, as I faithfully do that, he does shape me, he does mold me, that he does help me become a better version of myself, that he does help me become the person that I believe I was created to be in the first place. So that's exactly sort of what we're going to do as we go throughout this series. We're going to unpick a little bit, well, what does it mean to follow Jesus? How do we do that? How do we help, through following Jesus, how do we allow him to shape us and mold us to be in the person that he created us to be in the first place? And to get started with that, I want us to just take a few moments exploring or taking a look at the first people who started on this journey, this first people that became followers of Jesus. And so we're going to take a look at something that a guy called Matthew wrote for us. Matthew wrote one of the Gospels, those, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John we find at the beginning of the New Testament. They sort of tell us a biographical account of the life of Jesus. So Matthew was there when Jesus said these things. Matthew was there when he did these things, and he wrote it down for us to have a record of. So we're going to take a look at something Matthew's written for us here. It says this: as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Simon, called Peter, Jesus later on changes Simon's name to Peter. That's a story for another time. So Jesus, he's walking by the Sea of Galilee, and Simon and Andrew are out fishing, casting the nets, what they were doing. And it sort of seems like an accidental encounter that Jesus just happens to be walking past the Sea of Galilee, just as Simon and Andrew are out there fishing. And, is that true? Did Jesus know they were going to be there? Is it an accident? Is it a chance encounter? The reality is, we don't really know. I mean, for what it's worth, I think Jesus knew that Simon and Andrew were going to be there, that this wasn't a chance encounter, but we don't know for sure. And actually, it doesn't really make any difference. Let's read on. And Jesus says, "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." Now imagine this was you. You're minding your own business, doing your own business. You're out there fishing, and this guy turns up, and he says to you, "Stop what you're doing and come and follow me." Now, what would you do? How would you respond in this situation? How will they respond? At once, they left their nets and they followed him. They didn't even have to think of it. They just dropped whatever it is they were doing. They dropped their nets, they dropped the fish, they left it behind, and they got up and they started following Jesus. And as we read on, it says, going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father, and they followed him. You see, James and John get an invitation too. It's not just Simon and Andrew. And they leave their nets, they leave their fishing gear, they leave their father, and they go off and they follow Jesus. Why would they do that? Why would anybody do that? Well, the reason is because Jesus gave them an offer they couldn't refuse. Jesus gave them an invitation that anybody in their culture, anybody in their context would have dropped everything to have taken up that call to follow him. And the reason they did that is not because it was Jesus who was given that invitation. It's not because the Messiah, the Son of God, God in human form, was standing before them and saying, "Come and follow me." Because at this point, they don't know that. They just see that this guy is in front of them. The reason why this invitation was so compelling was because Jesus was a rabbi. Now, rabbis were these enigmatic characters that traveled around the region, and they would teach people about Jewish traditions and Jewish laws and their sort of interpretation of how to follow these laws. And so they go around sharing their own sort of interpretation of this. And a rabbi's interpretation of the Jewish law was called a yoke or their yoke. Now, a yoke is an agricultural equipment. You can see in here, it's this sort of bar that you put on an oxen so it could plow something, or that you can harness them together. So the yoke, or a yoke, is the rabbi's trademark. It's what sets them apart. So each of these rabbis had their own yoke, their own way of sort of interpreting and teaching about the Jewish scriptures. And they would travel around telling people about this, and people would follow them. And actually, they would have a bunch of disciples who would go with them, who would spend time with them, who would follow them, who would become like them. And the goal of the disciple of the rabbi is to take this yoke and to teach it to others, to apply it and to share it with others. The goal of the disciple was to become like your rabbi. And we see this is all sort of built up on the way that the whole of the Jewish education system was built. You see, the way that it was focused, the Jewish education system at this time was focused around the scriptures, the Old Testament section of our Bibles that we have. And from the age of about 5, kids would go off to school and they'd learn about the scriptures. And by the end of stage 1, they would have learned the Torah. So that's the first 5 books of the Bible. So that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers. They would learn those things. They would memorize that. By the time that they were like 12 or 13, they would have memorized that they could recite that. I mean, that's amazing. My son's 15. I can't get him to remember to like put his socks in the washing machine or to get his uniform ready, but they would have memorized the first 5 books of the Bible. And by the end of that stage 1, most kids would leave the education system at that, and they would go out and they would follow their parents into whatever industry that they were in, become fishermen or farmers or whatever it is, that they'd go out into the world. But the brightest students, the best students, would go on to stage 2, where they would, for the next so many years until they were 17, they would memorize the entire Old Testament, that's 39 books of the Bible, Genesis through to Malachi, they would memorize it. Now, you have to be a bright mind to be able to do that. Again, they could recite that. They would know the entire Old Testament. And again, at this point, when most people reached this stage, so the best students went on to stage 2, most of them would drop out at this stage, and they would go into the family business, follow their become farmers or fishermen or whatever it was. But the best of the best would go on to the next stage, where they would go to a rabbi and they would apply to become a disciple. And so, these are the brightest minds. These are the best of the best. These are people who they got through stage 1 and they memorized the Torah, those first 5 books. And they got through stage 2, they memorized the entire of the Old Testament. And they'd go up to a rabbi and say, Rabbi, can I be your disciple? Can I follow you? Can I learn from you? Can I be like you? And these rabbis would sort of then assess these young people. They would grill them. They would interview them because they want to see, is this kid that's standing in front of me, is this kid good enough to do what I do? Can they take my yoke? Can they pick up my yoke? And can they share it with other people? So rabbis would only want to pick the best of the best of the best because the extent of their influence lied in their disciples. The extent of their reach lied in the ability or the capacity of their disciples. So they would pick from them, and only the best of the best of, I'll just leave that there, of the best would actually get to be a disciple of the rabbi. And what we can't get our heads around is this is the dream job. This is the golden opportunity. The equivalent today would be like getting a trial at a top football club or being signed to a major record label. This is the best of the best of the best got to be disciples of rabbis. Everyone else dropped out and went about, following in their family's footsteps. So with that information, let's go back to this first encounter and read it again. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and they followed him. And going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father, and they followed him. Of course they left everything to follow Jesus. Absolutely everybody in their context would have done the same thing. See, the thing is, we think the disciples were teenagers at this point when Jesus invited them to follow him, which means that they probably dropped out of the education system after stage 1. They are not the best of the best of the best. They're not the best of the best. They're not even the best. They didn't make it. They were off doing, following their fathers, being fishermen. And then this rabbi stands before them. This rabbi turns up, who, he's already been kicking up a fuss, this guy. Jesus, they probably would have heard about Jesus, this rabbi. He teaches like nobody else is taught. He seems different from the other rabbis. There's something special about him. There's something unique about him. And he stands in front of them and he looks them in the eye and he says, "Follow me." It's the golden opportunity. And they drop everything. They drop their nets and they follow Jesus. And 8 other people join them too. And for the next 3 years, they go on this amazing adventure. They follow Jesus around and they listen to the things that Jesus says and they see the things that Jesus does. And they even do some of those things. And blind people are healed. The sick are healed. Dead people are brought back to life. And wherever Jesus goes, he leaves this trail of hope and possibility in his wake. And behind him are these 12 disciples running, trying to keep up, to stay as close as they possibly can to their rabbi. The thing about disciples is, their goal is to be close to their rabbi. Their goal is to become like their rabbi. In effect, they're apprentices. So disciples of Jesus are apprentices of Jesus. They're learning to be like Jesus. They're learning to do the things that Jesus did. And the way that they learned that was by spending time with them. Disciples learned from their rabbi by being as close to their rabbi as they possibly could. Wherever their rabbi went. They took every single opportunity to sit at their rabbi's feet and to listen to them and to follow them and to do the things that they did. And so, Jesus did this. He traveled around the region of Galilee. And, they traveled, as they traveled, they walked everywhere. Uber wasn't invented back then. They didn't have enough money for camels or donkeys. So they just walked. And these disciples followed Jesus wherever he went on these roads. And again, the roads are not quite what we picture. Even the paths are not what we picture. They were sort of like these dusty plains, and over time that rock became really hard, and you'd walk along it, and it's just this big mass of dust. And as the wind kicked up, the dust would cover you. And as you're walking along, you just get covered in all the dust. I mean, this isn't actually a road from the time; it's just Google images. So there you go. It's the closest I could find. And they just get covered in this dust. And so there's this Jewish saying, there's this Jewish blessing that goes something like this. May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi, or another way of saying it is powder yourself with the dust from their feet. The point is, may you be so close to your rabbi that the dust that is on them is on you. May you be so close to your rabbi that as you sit on their feet, you sit so close to them, listening to them, that you learn from them, that you walk in step with them, that you're so close to them, following in step, that the dust that is on them is on you. That like the disciples were literally covered in Jesus' dust. It's both a beautiful and a gross image at the same time. And I mean, this is what it's all about. This is the dream job. They wanted to be covered in the dust of their rabbi. And these 12 guys got the opportunity to do that. But it didn't stop there. It didn't end there. Actually, Jesus extended this invitation. And a bit later on, Matthew records these words, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are wearied and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and I'm humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And the amazing thing here is actually this invitation is an invitation that Jesus extends to all of us. This is, before we've read about Simon and Andrew and James and John, and he looked them in the eye and he says, "You, come and follow me." But now he stands in front of a crowd, and actually I think he says this to all of us. He says, he looks us in the eye and he says, "Come to me. Come to me, take my yoke upon you. Learn from me." And this is an invitation that Jesus invites to absolutely every one of us. That Jesus, the rabbi, but Jesus who's more than a rabbi, Jesus the Messiah, Jesus the Son of God, Jesus who is God in human form, stands in front of each and every one of us and extends this invitation. Come to me, follow me. Take up my yoke. And it's an invitation. It's not a command. There's a choice that he extends with that. Look, I'm inviting you. You can follow me. You can learn from me. You can take my yoke, my interpretation of things upon you. Or don't. It's up to you. The choice is with us. And the question that we have at the start of this series as we're looking what it means to follow Jesus is, how do I respond to this invitation? Just like the disciples, James and John and Simon and Andrew dropped everything to go and follow Jesus. Am I willing to do the same thing? Am I willing to actually stop what I'm doing to start following him? Am I willing to actually orientate myself around me, that invitation that he has, come to me. And it's an invitation that if we take that up, that we learn from him, that we follow him, that we are close to him, that we allow ourselves to be covered in his dust. It's an invitation that he gives to all of us, but it's also an invitation that he gives to those of us who are wearied and burdened, I wonder if you ever feel wearied or burdened. Do you ever feel under the strain, the weight of the strain of expectation? You know, the pressure that other people put on you. That's exactly what Jesus was speaking into. He was actually talking about the burden that the religious leaders and the religious authorities at the time put upon them. He says, look, if you're feeling wearied and burdened by the expectation, the pressure of others, come to me. I think we can extend this though. You know, if you're feeling wearied and burdened by the weight of life or of responsibility, of just getting through the day, of doing the things that you need to do, of the pressures of relationships or finances or health or whatever it is, and it's like a weight that's on your shoulders, and it's exhausting, and it's just this burden that you're carrying around. Jesus says, come to me if you're wearied and burdened, and I'll give you rest. That actually you will find rest for your soul in me. I mean, what an amazing image is that? I can't even quite get my head around it. We've just come back from a week's holiday, and we actually spent a night away, just Louise, my wife and I. My son spent an evening, a night with his sister. She's at university, and we checked into a hotel that had a spa. Oh, it was amazing. They had a jacuzzi, and it was sunny, and we rested. It was amazing. But Jesus is saying that come to me, and you that experience that you have when you go on a holiday and you can put your email on out of office. I love doing that. Do you like doing that? If who got an out of office email reply from me this week? No one. Great, because you're not emailing me. Thanks, Naomi did. But there you go. I love doing that because I can switch off. I can unplug for this moment. And Jesus is saying that if you come to me, that experience that you get when you go on holiday that lasts for a short period of time, you will discover that not just for your being, but the depth of your being, your soul, who you are, what makes you will discover rest. And the reason he says that, is because I want you to follow me. I want you to allow yourself to be shaped by me. I want you to allow yourself to be molded by me, to be formed by me. Because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I think we can often misinterpret this because a yoke is an implement of work. There is work involved in following Jesus. And actually sometimes it is difficult. It is hard work. But what Jesus is saying is the yoke that I have for you will not leave you feeling wearied and burdened. If you follow me properly, if you listen to me, if you do the things that I do, the yoke that I have for you will not leave you feeling exhausted. It won't leave you feeling burdened. It's light. And it fits us perfectly because he is gentle and he is humble and he puts that onto us. It's a yoke that was designed for us. So throughout this series, we're going to dive into some of this content and we're going to explore how can we be followers of Jesus and look at these three goals. We're going to get the band up on stage as we wrap up this time. And there's these three goals that John Mark Comer sets out in his book that we're going to explore each week. So next week, we're going to look at goal number one. Now, the goal of a disciple is to be with Jesus. It's to spend time with him. It's to be close with him. What does that look like? How do we do that in our context, in our culture, in our world? The second goal of the disciple is to be like their rabbi, to become like him. So we're going to look at what does that mean? How do we become like Jesus? That just as I started to become a bit like my friends in Cornwall who were actually from Liverpool, how do we become like Jesus? And then the third thing is we're going to look at how do we do the things that Jesus did? That as we follow him, as we become his disciples, it's not just about knowledge or information. It's actually about transformation, that we can be like him and we can do the things that he did. So we're going to pick it up right there next week. But for now, may you be covered in the dust of your Rabbi Jesus. Why don't we stand?